Hi, everybody. This is Skip Alzheimer. Welcome to the AV Geeks Lunchtime Streaming Show, where we show old 16mm films and talk about them. So, this is the last day at the film conference, AMIA, which is in Pittsburgh. And so, in honor of that, in Pittsburgh, that's where U.S. Steel is based. So, we're going to show some films about steel. But also, I'm going to talk to a couple more people who are people who have tuned in to our show over the last couple of years. And some of the names you might remember, some of them might be new, but get them to kind of talk about what they do with moving image archiving. But first, this is a wonderful film. It's not made by U.S. Steel, I don't think. It's called Steel Man's Servant. And I don't know if this was, I don't have a date for this, but I feel like, I'm kind of scrolling through right now as I'm looking at it. Maybe this is post-World War II or right around World War II. But, yeah, phenomenal footage here. Beautiful, beautiful footage. So, let's go ahead and watch that. And I'll be back. Thanks for watching. Enjoy.
From the good red earth comes iron ore, the basic element of steel. Can you imagine what would happen if a great magnet suddenly wrenched all steel from our daily life? What would happen to our skyscrapers? What would happen to our homes? What would become of our great bridges? How could we travel? How could we farm? How could we even communicate with one another? What would become of all industry? What indeed would become of all of us? Only in a nightmare could such a calamity occur. And so we begin the story of steel, with huge shovels ripping the raw red iron ore from its ancient beds. 17 tons at a gulp is the capacity of this hungry giant, eating into the bank of ore. A 34,000-pound load made possible by the strength and boundless capacity of steel. This is called the age of electricity. Is it not also the age of steel? It's an age of tremendous locomotive strength, made possible and pressed into usefulness by steel. Lightweight, stronger railroad cars rolling over ribbons of steel. Open pit mining is restricted to months when frost is out of the ground. But the year around, we find the men of the underground mines, like gnomes, resting from nature or lying far beneath the earth's surface, contributing to the steady stream of loaded ore cars flowing between the iron ranges of the Northwest and the northern harbors of the Great Lakes. Puffing impatiently, the ore boats of the Great Lakes fleet await their loads under ore bins at the docks. They must go. We must get this good red ore to the mills. So down comes the loading chutes, like the mouths of a huge prehistoric monster, to pour the ore into the belly of the waiting ore boat. Up goes the gate and out pours a brown-red stream of the earth, which makes steel. Few things have less value than this raw iron ore as we see it now. Yet there are few things of greater value and benefit to our modern civilization when the labor and intelligence of man is applied. These carriers must work fast during late spring, summer, and early fall. While the ice is out, scores of ships in this large lake fleet are constantly on the go. The loading completed, they start in an endless stream for the southern lake ports to feed the hungry blast furnaces of the steel mills to the south. Three days later, it's the end of the line and all hands on deck. There's no rest for an ore transport. 2 or 3 hours in port, and that's all, as men drive huge grab buckets like iron dragons, which snatch great bites of the ore stored in mountains of red earth, all ready for the blast furnaces. Riding the cab of a clamshell bucket along an ore bridge as high as a 6-story building, we see the ore picked up from a trough behind the unloaders by another clamshell and carried across the storage yards, traveling along a giant ore bridge just like the one we're on. Thousands upon thousands of tons of cataloged, registered, and practically pedigreed ore pass beneath us. The ant has nothing on the steel business, for enough ore must be stored in summer to last through the winter when lake carriers are icebound. Steel skyline looms before us, a skyline made up of blast furnaces, tall sentinels of the steel plant which change the ore into molten iron. And here the cycle of steel making really begins. With the first step in the making of iron, an 8-ton skip hoist dumps into the blast furnace a rich mineral stew of ore, limestone, and coke. We're getting up speed now. Down below on the casting floor, the stage is set. At intervals of 6 hours, the charge, smelted down under intense heat, is withdrawn. And here comes the signal to tap. Ready for their end of the job, these fellows stab an oxygen torch through the hole, piercing a plug of clay, and here it comes, a writhing stream of molten iron, 2,600 degrees hot. Between 150 and 250 tons are tapped in a cast. 100 tons or so stream down runways of sand and graphite into the first of 2 huge ladles. Then the gate is raised and the molten stream flows to a second ladle. Outside lies the ladle, a thermos bottle as big as a tank car, lined with brick capable of holding molten iron at the highest possible temperature. A lot goes on in the 20 minutes that it takes to make a cast, not so much in the 6 hours between casts. Then there's time to relax. But now another sample must be taken from the golden stream, a test specimen which will tell the steelmaker the quality of his work. It takes skilled men to nurse these monsters, men who know the whims of iron, men who've been feeding the pulse and taking the temperature of liquid metal for a good many years. It's positively uncanny the way these fellas, with a single glance at their samples, recognize the caliber of the whole batch, and they seem pretty happy with this one. Now we have molten iron, the first step in the production of steel. This liquid iron goes for a while into huge storage tanks called mixers. We'll come back to this iron soup a little later, but first, the open hearth furnaces of steel. By far, the greatest amount of steel produced in the United States is made in open hearth furnaces such as these. The ravenous open hearth is never on a diet. It devours good scrap metal, odds and ends of antique flivvers, and chunks of old rails, axles that may yet roll again, even chicken wire. And up on the charging machine, you see the operator handle a huge piece of machinery so agile that it picks up an 8,000-pound charging box of scrap, thrusts it into the furnace, twists and turns and rams and charges at the touch of a hand upon a switch. And now back to that iron soup we left in the storage mixer a moment ago. As the work goes on, this molten metal is combined with the melted scrap. Perched high above, the crane man watches the ladles fill, then guides giant hooks in to carry the ladle down the line to the furnace. Meanwhile, an old hand at the game waits by the open hearth for the hot metal coming up from the mixer, ready to direct the crane man's pouring of the fiery charge into the blazing furnace. About 50 tons of liquid iron are now added to the melted scrap, and the sheer beauty of this scene never fails to grip the thousands who visit these plants. Years ago, the making of steel was the experienced guesswork of smart old-timers. But today, their experience is backed up by the most accurate of scientific instruments. This is steel in the making. Throughout every stage of steel's vivid evolution, repeated tests are taken. the helper dips his test spoon, mind you, into the soup, and to the steelmaker it is just that, soup. And this sample, poured into a test mold, goes to the laboratory for analysis. These are the craftsmen of steel. These and hundreds of thousands like them, men born and raised to the companionship of hot metal, young men learning their trade, old men grown gray in the University of Steel itself, men who know all the moods and fancies and quips and quirks of molten metal, who know how to tame and temper this flaming monster to the service of mankind. By their watches and their blue filter glasses shall ye know them. A golden glow on their faces, they peer into the open hearth to read the future of this steel as a gypsy reads your fortune in the tea leaves. Even as a great chef expertly adds just the right seasoning to his famous dishes, so these expert chefs of the open hearth add the condiments that season steel, in this case, a helping of ferromanganese. These boys certainly can handle their shovel. They swing and follow through with all the power and grace of a champion golfer. They must hit a certain spot inside that furnace, and that, believe me, is quite an art. On the ranch or in a lumber camp, this means come and get it or we'll throw it away. It means grub. But in these mills, it means pour steel. Here are the cinder snappers, jacks of all trades. With ramming rod ready, they wait, while men on the other side prepare the furnace for tapping. Another pinch of this and that from the bins and boxes, according to the sure recipes of Steel's cookbook. Meanwhile, the helper with an oxygen torch burns through the clay which plugs the tapping hole. They're raring to go, these cinder snapper lads, but it takes time to uncork this flask. Just a moment now, only a few more ashes to get out of the way, and then the go-ahead will come. It's a welcome signal, because the smash of ramming through a heat of steel is always a highlight in their day's work. All together, there she goes. It's steel, backbone of the world, steel for axles, springs, girders, steel for bridges, wires, ships, automobiles, magic and marvels from the earth, from the labor and brains of men who serve their fellow men. It takes about 15 minutes to fill this ladle. Slag, the scum or flux of limestone, floats on top of the steel, finally overflowing into the slag pot. Bathed in a red glare, the craneman handles with ease his heavy load of glowing metal, this gigantic ladle like a huge soup bowl, 150 tons of liquid steel. Flames lick through the scum of its surface, a blood-red touch from the seething cauldron. Stately as a ship, the ladle moves to its position at the pouring platform, ready at the mere touch of the hand to discharge into the waiting ingot molds. Skillfully, the craneman maneuvers the heavy load to rest, centering the nozzle above the first of the molds. The stopper is released, and out gushes the steel to fill them one by one. Every little movement has a meaning of its own in steel. Tests for quality, such as these, are very important. They go to make steel one of the most scientifically controlled operations in all industry. Meanwhile, the fascinating work of pouring goes on. Here's a young apprentice in steel making, taking a lesson from the older heads of the pouring platform, as with an optical pyrometer, he measures the temperature of the molten steel. And we are seeing just what he sees through the pyrometer. Steel at 2,800 degrees hot. Slowly cooling, beautiful to look for. The ingots sparkle and effervesce in their molds. When cooled enough, they will be stripped of their most unfashionable jackets. Another day without an accident. It is now common for months to go by without a single man being injured. So highly developed is modern safety practice. One of the most thrilling operations of the whole dramatic story of steel making is the production of alloy steel in the electric furnace. Inside this hottest of all furnaces, huge electrodes, suspended over the mass of selected scrap, slowly creep down. An electric arc leaps from electrodes to scrap and produces one of the most spectacular sights ever filmed. Here is Inferno. After 3 hours under this man-made lightning, the scrap is melted and the electrodes purr over the molten steel, now ready for the addition of alloys. Finally, the precious soup is cooked, and out of the cauldron pours another heat of stainless steel. Steel for kitchens, for architectural trim, for fine instruments, and for laboratories and hospitals, for use wherever a glossy acid and rust-resisting surface contributes to modern industry and to modern living. Rising before you like a harvest moon is the hungry maw of the Bessemer converter, chief actor in one of the greatest shows in steel. Closely watching this rising monster are the men who run the show, looking at life and steel from behind shatterproof glass, 30 feet away from the trio of Bessemer converters mounted on a high platform. The operator's whistle was the signal which brought the hot iron from the mixer and started it pouring into the mouth of the Bessemer converter. This iron whale, if really hungry, could swallow a score of Jonahs at a gulp, or could find room in its red-hot gullet for a good-sized motorboat. Every night is 4th of July when the Bessemers go into action, and here's your action. Roman candles lancing the blackness of the night. The girders of a railroad bridge march past, silhouetted by the licking flames of these beacons of steel. As many of you have often seen, these huge torches flare up in the dark as symbols of steel working for men. You are seeing it as the steel maker sees it, engaging the carbon content by the color of the flame. When the flame displays the telltale characteristics, the conversion is complete, and the Bessemers are ready to pour the magic metal, which first we saw as plain ore, then soft and molten iron, and now transformed to steel for all the needs of man. Here in the stripping yard is the row of jacketed ingots we left sparkling a moment ago, and now cool enough to shed their molds. Reaching down, the human-like fingers of this Martian giant grasp and pry the molds from ingots weighing between 20 and 40,000 pounds. An impressive sight as the rich crimson velvety glow emerges from beneath the rising molds. Steel has no competitor in modern life, no possible substitute. Wherever you look, you encounter examples of its service to man. The nation's parade of glowing ingots is a barometer of economic conditions and is watched by many who seek to gauge business activity. For as the ingots go, so goes industrial America. The golden pillars of fire go next to soaking pits for reheating, where they literally soak in a bath of flame which evenly restores their temperature. That was the signal to send one of these glowing ingots from the soaking pit. It is 2,200 degrees hot as you see it now. And we begin to get an idea of the innumerable processes required to make fine steel and how economical the finished product is after all this labor and effort. For after all, this is a hairpin, a thumbtack, a monkey wrench, a rail, or a beam in infancy. Through a mirror directly in front of him, the operator sees the ingot bumping along the conveyor rollers like a car on a corduroy road, unaware of the punishment to come as it will be squeezed, pounded, and pressed into one of the 1,000 shapes which meet the demands of industry. The big idea here is to crack off the scale which is formed and to prepare the ingot for the real rough stuff to come. The ingot is manipulated from a pulp, protected by heavy screening and shatterproof glass, supported by the post partially hiding the ingot. The roller man glances at the dials and brings the roll down. It's a squeeze play, an inch or more at a time until the huge ingot is flattened to a slab about 5 inches thick, ready to be cut like cheese into shorter lengths for further rolling. In the continuous rolling mill, skilled workers in pulpits set high up across the floor from each set of rolls chart the course the slab must follow as they phone dimensions and adjustments from stand to stand. These continuous mills cover so much ground that the traffic lights of a mill are as important as the red and green stop and go lights of a small town. All clear. The rolls are set and ready, and here it comes, a white-hot slab of steel sliding swiftly and smoothly toward the all-powerful rolls. The first pass takes off the scale. Then a quarter turn on the turntable sends the slab sideways into the spreader to increase its width. An extra push is needed here to force it through the rolls. That's only the first step. Farther down the long line, the width is checked. And then the rapidly transforming slab of steel races on beneath showers of water and steam to enter the reversing mill. And back and forth again it must pass. And this reducing process we don't recommend to the ladies. It's hard going for the slab, but it's just another dial setting and a turning of a switch to the man at the levers. He sits at a control board like the keyboard of an organ and casually watches the huge rolls do their work. Getting longer and longer, the plate races on to run the gauntlet of the finishing stands, 4 giant stands in tandem, each one squeezing the plate thinner and thinner. From the beginning of this pictorial drama of steel, we have seen how machines have been called to the aid of the men who make steel. These machines of the steel mills are genii more powerful, more incredible than Aladdin ever summoned by rubbing his wonderful lamp. Watch this servant work for man, his master. Machines obedient to the merest touch. Some as delicate as the flutter of a butterfly's wing. Some as powerful as an avalanche. These same machines, while producing amazingly low-cost steel, have created many new commodities, many new markets, thus providing for countless workers occupations which never existed before. One of the most interesting of recent inventions, the rocking shear, was suggested by an ordinary rocking chair, perfected in a wooden model which sheared chewing gum instead of steel. And now watch the result. Rocking power, high pressure shear, cutting cold steel plate with incredible ease and accuracy. Such is the story of steel today. Steel plate for use in railroad cars, steamships, bridges, and buildings. Well, boys, you're doing a swell job, and we're getting a real thrill watching you. Before going on, let's have a bottle of pop together. Drink hearty. Moving on in the production of steel, we come to the manufacture of sheet steel. Hot roll like steel plate. Sheet steel is merely rolled thinner and thinner, and then, cleaned with acids, it is cold rolled in coils to even lesser gauges, emerging on the other side of this machine as cold roll sheet for use in automobile fenders and bodies and stoves, refrigerators, and the many products of pressed steel. Further reduced and tin coated, cold rolled steel has thousands of uses as tin plate. Here's where the girls come in as inspectors of the finished plate. These shining surfaces must tempt the vanity of any daughter of Eve, but surely not this girl. Uh-oh! Well, to err is human. It must have been the oversized mirror that did it. With that little touch of feminine vanity satisfied, she goes back to her work, an artist at her job. These girls are mighty useful employees in a tin plate mill, and their schedule is arranged accordingly. An hour on and 15 minutes off for coffee, tea, and rest. Here we are back again with hot steel, and there's a red-hot rail coming through the first pass, taking on his first big impression. Like everything else in steel, this rail was rolled down from an ingot. The rail bar takes more definite shape with each new pass through the rolls. After the first pass, it moves down to the end of the line, across the conveyor table, and up on the high line in the middle to an intermediate pass, and then across another conveyor table and down the line at the right to the finishing rolls for its final impression, the finished rail over which the wheels of your train may someday click. Steel cuts steel, the cold biting through the hot, sawing a rail bar of more than 100 feet long into standard lengths. We go along now to still another most interesting episode in the fascinating drama of steel production, to still another pictorial chapter in the saga of steel, rolling giant beams. How many people would ever guess that from this 6-foot ingot, a 36-inch I-beam, almost as long as a city block, could be rolled? Hot rolls steam and sizzle, while an operator skillfully trips the switches controlling a pressure of many thousands of pounds. Back and forth under the tripping rolls the ingot passes until it takes on a faint shape, the semblance of an I-beam, suggestion of a girder that may support a bridge or a skyscraper. It's all as easy as falling off a log, or so it seems, as this young man of steel handles the controls, passing the huge form backward and forward, reducing the gauge, shaping the rough beam into an almost finished product, and sending it along down the line on its way to the finishing stands. There comes the I-beam out of the finishing stand, and we have actually seen how 150 feet of strong, sturdy steel can be rolled from a 6-foot ingot, the columns and girders with which America builds its future. The beam slides down the rollers, coming to a stop at the saw to be trimmed and cut to length. They're mighty particular to get things right, these steel men. Here, they're taking a sample from the hot beam, a test piece, which will go on to the laboratory. But right now, they have another use for it. The hot beam sample performs a dual role, serving also as a fireless cooker de luxe for Mike's private coffee pot. It's too good a thing to keep to himself, so big-hearted Mike calls powerful Pat to have a sipper of the old Java with him. I accept with thanks, says he, but don't ever let the wife know you're this good, or she'll be after pinning an apron on you. Now let's stroll over to the axle forge where immense hammers are pounding like pile drivers. This machine does the heavy work, but man's hand shapes the railroad axle. Packing an awful wallop, this hammer slams down on the helpless round, beating it into shape. blows alternate at the hammer as each axle is turned. Now the axle is forged from the other end as the giant hammer shapes the collar. See between the hammer blows the alert, intense faces of these men. While the axle is getting its finishing touches, railroad wheels are being turned out in another impressive operation of the modern steel plant. The first thing which will catch your eye will be a red-hot wheel block, as the steel men call it, about to take its place between the two halves of a wheel mold. And then as men and machinery take advantage of the precise moment, the glowing hot block is formed under 20 million pounds of pressure. Slowly, very slowly pressed and flattened and shaped into a blank, something close to a railroad wheel, but not yet the real article. And then with scarce an instant's pause, the blank is lifted from mold number 1, while mold number 2 slides slowly and easily to the left and relentlessly grips the victim between its powerful jaws. And then comes the final shaping in the finishing mold under further terrific pressure. If you thought the first one was a squeezer, watch number 2. The throttle of Casey Jones never controlled as much power as these levers which now release the rough wheel and send it on to the caliper man. Only perfection gets by this chap. Then upon emerging, the wheel is ready for finishing, perhaps to convey you someday, possibly soon, on a journey of your heart's desire. Here's another chapter in the tale of steel. Coming out of a reheating furnace is a pair of billets, 30-foot lengths of steel about 2 inches square. They too were rolled down from an ingot, rolled in a billet mill much like a rail mill. The billets run the gamut of 16 sets of reducing rolls. Each roll reduces the diameter and hastens the rod with ever-increasing speed toward its final reduction. In a moment, you'll see it begin to step out, the snail turning into a scared rabbit. Its rate of speed through the rolls will jump from 4 to 45 miles an hour, better than a racehorse, as its length increases from 30 feet to almost 3/4 of a mile. These close shots show exactly what takes place. Slow at the start, then faster in this intermediate pass, and still its speed increases. If you watch closely, you can see it dart through these rolls. And at last, there it comes, whistling into the coiler, to be tamed into a shapely coil of finished rod. These marvelous machines of steel pull their own taffy, heavy wire from rod as we see here in these big dies. But we're not through yet with this metallic candy pulling. Now the rapidly thinning wire goes to a huge drum, which is a real taffy puller, and our wire gets tenuous and more tenuous. The operator most accurately measures the gauge. For 1/1000th of an inch counts in the kind of accuracy that is standard in wire drawing. The rest of the story of wire making is one reduction after another, 1/100th or 1/1000th of an inch at a time. Finer and finer the tough steel wire is drawn. On the wire goes darting, twisting, weaving to and fro through as many as 11 dies until finally it comes out all bright and silvery, almost as fine as silken thread. And so wire is made for countless demands, for bed springs, nails, fence, telephone and telegraph lines, more than 90,000 uses represented in our modern civilization. Production of pipe and tubes is another important phase of steel making. The finest kind of tube is seamless. Starting as a hot round, a reheated cylinder of solid steel is hustled along and rammed into the seamless piercing mill. By means of great pressure, created by whirling cone-shaped rolls forcing the malleable steel forward over a piercing point, the round emerges on the other side as a seamless tube, a hollow pipe of hot rolled steel. It's remarkable how perfectly this round of golden hot steel is pierced, expanded, and finished to meet specification. One of the most interesting operations to be found in any of these great steel mills. And so, mile after mile of seamless tube finds its place in the pipelines which serve us for heat, fuel, water, and the other necessaries of modern life. Let's turn from the colorful, dramatic sight of the mill to the quiet of the laboratories and to the scientists. Much of what you've seen would not have been possible without the research men constantly working into the future of steel and devising new ways for it to serve its master, man. Here we see steel's anatomy photographed and studied. Here's a piece of Corten steel getting the tensile test. That dark-colored piece the metallurgist has just placed in the machine is being subjected to the severest possible tension. See how remarkably a piece of steel can be stretched, almost like rubber. 50, 60, 70,000 pounds of pull per square inch and more to find the breaking point. It's amazing that steel can stand such punishment. Finally, it does break under much greater strain than ever will be exacted in its actual use. With little furnaces such as these, the scientists worked with patient study and experiment to develop stainless steel, whose shining surface reflects the research and the effort devoted to its production. This is the fascinating world of steel. Many are those who walk its paths. The miner, the engineer, the crane man, the melter, the roller, the scientist, hundreds of thousands among the men of steel. More than 500,000 men are engaged in making steel, over half of them in the companies of United States Steel alone. Men who are confident and competent in their work. Men who can return to their homes and firesides proud and happy in the knowledge of their contribution to society. Beyond the door of a furnace, we see nothing but hot gases and bubbling metal. But the man who makes steel sees there streamlined trains streaking smoothly across the continent. Great ships carrying the products of the farm and factory to the four corners of the earth, sailing the seven seas with the promise of world peace through world trade, with commerce and profit to all. He sees concrete roads made from the slag of blast furnaces, busy with cars and trucks of steel. He sees beyond that bubbling steel the wire lines of modern telephone and telegraphic communication, and the high towers carrying electric power to home and industry. He sees modern farming made possible by steel machinery and fencing. Countless oil derricks stretching their structures to the heavens, gaunt frameworks of steel, landmarks of another of America's great industries. Big and little things he sees, the big little conveniences of modern cookery, stainless steel utensils in kitchen sinks, hammers and little nails that play a big part, or the melodious vibration of a finely drawn steel piano string. He sees acid-resisting cans for food preservation, or a fine steel watch spring set in a steel chassis. And he sees tall buildings of steel, rearing their proud heads almost above the clouds. Great bridges spanning rivers and harbors, bringing commerce and its people closer and closer together. All these and more, the man of steel sees. New eras, new standards of living, as the world moves forward with the men who make steel.
Hi everybody, I'm with Nathan, who is one of the people that watches the Lunchtime Streaming Show and actually comments. Nathan, tell us who you are and what you do.
I'm Nathan Jones, and when not hanging out in the comments, I am the curator of television news archives at the Vanderbilt Television News Archive at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. Great to say hello to everyone.
And I should say that the Vanderbilt archive is phenomenal. It's recorded since the 60s or 70s, all the television news?
We have all of the nightly news broadcasts of the three major networks, so ABC, CBS, NBC, going back to August of 1968, and then we record an hour of the highest rated cable news network show. We've been doing that since the 90s, and we record every time a current U.S. president speaks on a right-leaning network and a left-leaning network for comparison. So look for us online.
How diplomatic you are.
Look for us online at tvnews.vanderbilt.edu.
So what is a genre of film that you enjoy on our show?
On your show? Oh. There's so many, and I think it's the more esoteric things that you play, like what you did with, what was it, Halloween, where you had the clown church event. It's just, there is no such thing as too esoteric for your collection.
Okay, all right.
So it's those
I'll try
things
to
that
program
I really,
something esoteric to show
and
after this.
by gosh, do I love a theme day.
Okay.
So the church day.
Oh, you like that? Okay, good.
That was I love a theme.
All right,
so.
sweet. Okay.
And then toe tapping's probably also been that community involvement that you get us to engage in is. I wish I could do such cool community involvement with my collection. So.
Well, you can figure out a way to do it. I don't know.
Well, we don't have copyright, so we can't.
That's right. I forgot.
Yeah, we would get ban hammers all the time, so the bots would not like us. So.
Alas. Well, Nathan, it's a good to meet you in person, and I will see you in the comments. And I hope you have a good conference here in Pittsburgh at AMIA.
Thanks, Skip. Thank you for the opportunity. And hi and bye, everyone. Thanks.
Yeah, beautiful. Always big fan of industrial footage. So, and we have a lot. Essentially, we've been scanning for Oregon Archives, which is based in Pittsburgh, and I was not able to get the founder or co-founder of Oregon on a camera because of his schedule, but we do have another film set up. Actually, it's not even from him. It's from someone in Houston. And this is about oil rigs. It's called Steel Reef, and it is made by the American Petroleum Institute. And it's a, what we call greenwashing. So it basically shows you how great oil rigs are, platforms in the middle of the Gulf, and how great they are for the fish and all the things living in the sea. So this next film is called Steel Reefs. Enjoy.
The Gulf of Mexico is the richest, most productive, most exciting marine area that borders North America. It's a cradle for marine life, a sport fisherman's dream, a reservoir of fossil fuels, an incomparable source of protein from the sea, and a challenge to divers. The Gulf is the most. It has always been a priceless resource, but the potential it is achieving today has been fostered and spurred by the coming of the steel reefs. Hello, I'm Stan Waterman. I'm a professional skin diver and underwater photographer. I've been wedded to the sea for 25 years by vocation and avocation. 25 years of wonderful experience. I suppose the most exciting experience I've had was pursuing the great white shark. We sought around the world in making Blue Water White Death, the feature film. We're off on another adventure this morning, a different one. Sunrise on the bayous of Louisiana, following up an invitation by Gulf Coast diving friends who for years have urged me to come down and see a new marine world that was developed under the production platforms offshore in the Gulf Coast. A great network of artificial reefs, an ecosystem following the entire food chain up to the great commercial schools of fishes. I've never seen anything like it. This year I accepted the invitation. And so, with the sun rising behind us and a day to fulfill our adventures, we're on our way out to the Gulf now. It's a calm day on the Gulf. One of my diving friends catches 40 more winks as the eggs are scrambled for breakfast. The crew boats pass us as if we're dragging anchor. They rev up to 35 and 40 knots. We soon find ourselves passing through the communities of drill rigs and production platforms. reassuring neighbors for small craft ranging far out into the open Gulf. The shrimp boats are a part of the busy traffic pattern, harvesting the most valuable crop of marine crustacea in the world. Whole fleets of sport fishing boats will start out from the coast each morning on a calm day like this, each one eventually picking the platform where he thinks the action will be. And for action and clear water, we're headed for the deep platform, standing in 140 feet of water. All right. We'll take our light stand with us too. Gosh, I can see the stuff all over the pilings already. Barnacles look like they're almost an inch thick.
There's a green algae growing right at the surface, and
this is Bert Tettleton, one of the finest skin divers on the Gulf Coast.
they should have about 1 1/2 inches of growth on the pilings.
Terrific. Well, we're going to find big schools of fish down here, drop right down on a lot of action.
I certainly hope so, but you know, the hurricane may have spoiled the marine life.
What is this hurricane business here? The Chamber of Commerce told me it was a great climate.
Just about at this time, in the middle of August, old Mother Nature spoiled our plans by planning a hurricane across.
Okay, I'm used to it as a filmmaker. The world of the steel reef, like no marine environment I have ever been in before. Great barracuda were our reception committee, curious but not aggressive. Legions of spadefish sweep by majestically. As long as our movements are unhurried and easy, we will be accepted without disturbance in this diverse marine community. There's beauty under these platforms, a symmetrical beauty. The men swimming through the centralizers that once guided the drill shafts to the bottom. When you're just halfway down one of the supporting members, you're already 70 feet deep, and the surface is a distant, shimmering mirage. All of the Gulf Coast divers are shell collectors, amateur malacologists, and they know just where to look for the valuable shells that they will add to their collections. Wow! Woo! What a sight! It's like a forest.
Great, huh?
Going up, Burr. I love those spadefish.
They weren't as thick as they usually are. Well, that was it. Well, there were barracuda, amberjack.
All right.
Maybe we'll shoot an amberjack later on.
As long as you can eat them. Boy, that water is warm.
Yeah, it's great.
If it's so warm, why are you so blue?
Well, it's a little cool down close to the bottom.
Here's the prize. The species is Spondylus americanus. One in perfect condition can be worth as much as $50 in the collector's market. We moved on to another block of rigs.
Stan, this is an old gun, but it's my old favorite. Never fails.
Let me see what you're doing to that thing. Holy smokes, that isn't going to take too much impact.
Right. Well, I don't spearfish much anymore, but it helps to bring back a delicacy for the wife at times.
Doggone right.
All right.
Are you all ready?
Yeah, fine.
Okay, let's go. Amberjack. They're after amberjack today. The biggest ones I've ever seen come in on these rigs. The great pelagic jacks come in from the open sea to feed on the fish that live under the platforms, and man in turn preys on them. Burr stalks a big amberjack. He takes aim, fires at point-blank range, and misses. He's gung-ho, if not accurate at this particular moment. This time he strikes hard and well. The fish heads for the bottom. They're powerful. They'll drag a diver along with them. If they can make it to the 85 or 90-foot level, the murk level, they're in free because you dare not follow them into the zero visibility. Burr grapples with the reserve on his tank, and in doing so, he goes head first into one of the cross members on the rig. The rig didn't move an inch. You must watch your depth constantly. You'll be in deep water before you know it in the excitement of the chase. But Burr does check this fish's descent, brings him back towards the surface and now back to the boat. This is a big one. The amberjack aren't the best eating of the jacks by any means, but they're good eating, and this fellow will be made up into steaks for 3 different families ashore. The men, of course, are out to fill their larders, but they're also after records, and many of the species grow to record sizes here. There's the face of a man developing a hernia. Burr cocks his spear gun again. It's a twin-strand arbalete, a very standard gun for hunting. He's after barracuda this time, and they also grow big under these platforms, some of the biggest I've ever seen. The cuda takes off like a shot. He'll wind around the supporting members of the rig, and every time he takes a turn, Burr has to follow him and unwind him in the same direction. Incidentally, the only time that I've heard of when a barracuda attacked a spearfisherman, the only documented record, was when a man struck one and wounded it, and the cuda turned and bit the devil out of him, and he deserved it too. Barracuda will usually leave you alone if you leave them alone. But if you strike them, then you've picked the fight, and you can take your chances. This is a big one too. He'll go over 25 pounds easily, and that's big as cuda go. They used to call barracuda the tigers of the sea. Their ferocity towards divers and swimmers much overrated. As I mentioned before, if you leave the barracuda alone, he'll leave you alone. Human beings are not the normal prey for a cuda. We move on to another block of platforms that have attracted commercial fishermen. Here's one of the snapper boats, part of a fleet of over 50 that arrive from the Florida coast each summer to work these waters. The snapper fishery is an outgrowth of the development of oil rigs as artificial reefs along the Gulf Coast. The oil rigs have been neither conducive nor prohibitive to the shrimp business. Shrimp continue to thrive on the mud-sand bottom of the Gulf, and a huge multi-million-dollar shrimp business continues to thrive also. Here's the start of a shrimp cocktail for gourmet restaurants across the country. It is sport fishing that has experienced a bonanza all year round. Before a platform has set its legs on the Gulf bottom for just half a year, it has already attracted a vigorous and diverse marine ecosystem that includes many of the fish most prized by sport fishermen. Many species of jacks, like this one coming aboard. They're all superb fighters on light tackle. Sea trout, barracuda, snapper, and redfish. Remember, it doesn't have to be a monster to be fun. It looks like he's lassoed this one. Shortly after the first platforms appeared along the coast, the oceanic game fish also began to appear. The magnificent dolphin, rainbow lightning, and the most colorful of all game fish. The angler's great challenge and prize, the blue marlin. In fact, so many marlin and sailfish entered the Gulf that a major bill fishing tournament prospers here every year now. Here's a magnificent white marlin to fulfill any angler's dream. I met Dr. Carl Oppenheimer, chief marine biologist at the University of Texas. Dr. Oppenheimer was examining the stomach contents of fish being brought aboard one of the party boats, a field exercise he usually enjoys with the chance to wet a line himself. I filmed him at work and learned much from him.
Yes, this is a redfish. It's one of the more popular game fishes in the Gulf of Mexico. They grow to fairly good size, and this is a fairly decent sized adult. We're taking the stomach out now to see if we can get some idea of the contents as to what it's been eating. These fish are attracted to any solid reef type of structure, whether it be man-made or whether it be a natural reef.
You don't mind my asking you these questions while you're working here. I don't want to distract you and have the patient die on the operating table.
I'm afraid this patient's already dead.
We've seen great schools of these cruising around the rigs when we've been diving. What draws them to the rigs if they're open water fish?
Well, they're drawn just like almost any other animal in the sea is towards solid surfaces again. We've known this fact for quite a number of years, but we don't know exactly the total sequence of why fishes are attracted to solid surfaces like platforms, oil rigs that are becoming so abundant now in the Gulf of Mexico, and old car bodies. Japanese are using concrete artificial reefs and actually placing the reefs out in the ocean to increase the productivity for the fishermen. And this is being done here in the Gulf of Mexico and the Pacific and the Atlantic.
Dr. Oppenheimer, here's a fish that was just caught up on a bow, one of the more common fish, the white trout.
Right.
You get trout out here too?
We certainly do. We catch white trout, we catch speckled trout, and this is one of the fish that abound by the rigs in great numbers.
You've got everything out here. This is too much.
We're very fortunate.
Isn't he a beauty?
Very good edible fish. The edibility of it is very good. It's a clean fish, and it's a good sport fish on light tackle.
Is this a big one or about...
This would be called a small one.
Right, sir.
You know, this must be some of the most reliable and steady sport fishing you can find anywhere.
Well, I believe this is one of the few areas where we can say we catch fish every time. We're practically guaranteed fish because you've got so many places to fish. On the Louisiana coast, you've got 1,400 oil structures, or maybe a few more than that. And that's all man-made reefs. I mean, it's put there to get the oil out, but without the rigs and the structures, I wouldn't be in business here. We'd have to depend mostly on game fishing, trolling for marlin and such as that, whereas during this wintertime and all, when the water's too rough to go way out, we can fish on all these close rigs, and you can see the variety of fish we catch.
Then you really hit them, don't you? And so they do. Later on another boat, I spoke further with Dr. Oppenheimer. Dr. Oppenheimer, where does it start? What comes first to these artificial structures to begin the whole process?
These structures provide a biologically attractive surface initially colonized by bacteria that act as a primary base for other attached life. And then from this broth of living organisms in the surrounding seawater, a sequence of unicellular algae, protozoans, and other larval microscopic organisms attach. As a result, dense moss-like colonies will develop consisting of such microscopic creatures as this larval bryozoan and this delicate anemone. The larval stages of starfish and sea urchins, clams, oysters, and snails will then settle to share with these larval crabs a new habitat. These larval fish will also find protection and food to develop. These animals and many more will find the new artificial reefs a suitable habitat, and a new balanced ecosystem will result with the incrustation of every inch of the underwater platform structures, a veritable pasture of plants and animals. Barnacles will sweep smaller planktonic food from the rich water with bristle lacy feet, and periodically enrich the surrounding water with a cloud of eggs and sperm as these sea urchins are doing. All this growth results in the production of great amounts of food, which in turn supports clouds of fish fry. These millions of small fish will become food for larger fish, which will provide sport and food for man in his position at the top of the food chain. A growing commercial fishery may harvest those fish that reach maturity. And two, these barracuda occupy the pinnacle of the pyramid of the food chain with man, a pyramid reaching all the way down from the first bacteria to settle on the new underwater structures.
We tied up to a crew boat for an overnight berth. The snapper is the best eating of the Gulf Coast fish, and I was eager to try one. Dinner aboard the rig with the manager and the crane hoist operator provided the opportunity. Holy smoke! Cook rose to the challenge brilliantly.
We're going to have to make room here.
You mean to tell me you do this kind of thing 3 times a day all year round?
3 times.
You guys really live it up out here.
Yeah.
You did the farming stand, you're closest there.
Well, I thought he looked good underwater. When you landed that bullseye shot, he looks better now. At this particular time, I think I'd just as soon be at the top of the food chain. And I think the cook's watching us to see if any of this is going to be left. And I don't have any intention of leaving any of it. I don't believe there is. Burr, you like the fins, don't you?
Yeah.
Don't you? You're really sweet around the fins. I asked Burr about the coming of new species to the marine world under the platforms.
Great. I've seen changes such as new tropical species migrating into the area.
You mean fish that you didn't see here 10 years ago? Coming from where? From distant waters? And
Yeah, from the Caribbean, a branch of the Gulf Stream branches off in the summer months and comes right directly toward the mouth of the Mississippi. So whether they're introduced as adults or as pelagic eggs, they're still showing up new ones each year. Last year we discovered the reef butterfly, which is the least common of all the Bahamian butterflies.
the next morning, we made our last dive together, and it was by far the finest of our series. The stingray, much maligned, not the villain he's made out to be, an eater of crabs, of crustacea and mollusks. You practically have to step on him to get him to use that poison barb in his tail. He almost knocks Burr off of his perch there on the stanchion. Burr's struggling with one of his flash bulbs. Underwater photographers always struggle with flash bulbs, I can assure you. He glides by with powerful rhythmic strokes of his wing-like body. Coming up for a hug and a kiss here, the friendly stingray. Jack crevalles, Caranx hippos, the most beautiful of all the jacks. These have come from deep water, excited by the sound of our bubbles and our diving activity. Amberjack, even larger than the ones that we had seen before. The view was all in lines, straight up and down, as we moved deeper along the water column. Each new area has its own spectrum of life. At 70, 75, 80 feet, I must turn on my lights. This is the twilight zone, and here in deep water we finally found the snappers. They'd been here all along, but deep, driven here by the hurricane and the Gulf in storm time. The lights pick up the burnished red of their scales. The queen angelfish from Florida waters arrived on the steel reefs many years ago. Burr cataloged them when they first came, about 15 years past. Triggerfish, they graze on the encrusted material, also came from the Florida reefs. One by one, the spectrum of life has grown. Burr has cataloged it as he's seen the new additions. The French angelfish, Pomacanthus paru, arrived about 7 years back. And then today, seen for the first time, and very exciting to Burr, the gray angelfish, Pomacanthus arcuatus, cataloged, noted for the first time. And so the range of life grows. You must watch your time carefully. We've slipped over 100 feet deep now. The decompression meter tells you when it's time to come up, as will your depth gauge and your wristwatch. There is no equivocating. When it's time to go, it's time to go. Into the zone of light, through the area of spadefish, out through the bars of the great cage into the open gulf beyond. The men on the surface world watch us return from a world they will never see. Their eyeballs almost popped out of their heads when they saw the size of these snappers we'd taken. They dangle hooks, and they never catch them like that. Now, any diver will tell you that the best time of day is called the happy hour. Whatever the toast, we drink together now as veteran divers on the steel reefs. A new adventure in my diving experience, and a fine one I'll not forget. I've enjoyed sharing this story with you, and hope that we may dive together again soon.
All right, so I'm with Kristen Lipska. Did I say your last name right?
Yes.
Sweet. And you've been watching the show
Yeah.
for a while.
Occasionally.
Yeah. And we're here at the AMIA conference, and you're based in San Francisco, right?
Yes.
And you are, besides watching our show and commenting occasionally, you also you have a podcast, right?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
I'm an occasional co-host of the Cult Movies podcast. The main host is Anthony King, and the podcast is based on the Cult Movies books 1, 2, and 3, written by Danny Perry in, I think, the early 80s. So every episode, usually a guest comes on, picks a movie from the book. We're still on the first book. And then we talk about it, and then we all suggest pairing recommendations for the movie.
Nice.
Yeah.
And what is a recent film that you've talked about that you thought was a fascinating deep dive that kind of spurred a lot of really good conversation? Because I've been following it, and I haven't watched the podcast, but I've been following what you guys have been talking about.
Yeah.
There's some pretty interesting stuff in there.
I mean, there's things I hadn't seen before, like Behind the Green Door I saw for the first time for the podcast.
Oh, wow.
And
now San Francisco looks a little bit different to you now, huh?
Yeah, I mean, kind of just, I knew that was there already. We recently did a Harold and Maude episode is going to come out soon. We did Citizen Kane, which is we did it because it's in the Cult Movies book, but
right.
It feels like not a cult movie because it's such a classic. My first, when I was first on as a guest, I did Johnny Guitar, and I feel a strong love for Johnny Guitar.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. And you also have this magic way of finding media on the streets of San Francisco, walking down the streets and finding video decks and videotapes and...
The trick is to go on lots of walks. Fortunately, San Francisco is a very beautiful city and with pleasant weather, so it makes it easy. But yeah, if you go on lots of walks, your average of finding things will go up. Recently, we found like a big sack, like a grocery sack of Chinese language audio cassettes, and a lot of them were just music.
Wow.
It was really awesome.
That's really cool.
A lot of the covers were good.
So I should mention that today, coincidentally, is Stephen Parr Day. And so Stephen Parr was a film collector who had a collection in San Francisco called Oddball Films and Video. And Stephen has left us. But after he left us, you found a tape that he was on public access.
Yeah, I found a couple stacks of Betamax tapes. It's shoved into this giant street library. And it was right after I had repaired a Betamax deck. So I was like, okay, I guess I'll take these home now. And so every once in a while I would just like watch some of them. They're all just like recorded off TV mostly. And at one point I found this recording of a San Francisco public access show called, what was it? Do you remember what it is called?
I don't remember what it was.
Something?
Yeah, it was straight up
MVTV.
Right.
It had the name Margaret. Was one, and then it was one of the M's. But yeah, Stephen Parr was on as a guest. This was probably like the early 90s, and he was talking about his club.
Yeah, because he would have these kind of absurd, like, spectacle shows, and so he was on there being cool and just talking about what he was going to do, and it sounded...
He was being very cool.
It was really awesome. So we miss you very much, Stephen. This is, of course, What Would Stephen Do? And what Stephen would do is not really the best thing that you should do, but it would involve complaining a lot, being a very caring person, and maybe being a little bit of a pain in the ass to the people closest to you.
Yeah.
So, Kristen, thank you so much for talking about what you do. And look for her. What's the name of the podcast again?
It's called the Cult Movies Podcast.
And where can one hear it?
Wherever you find podcasts.
Wherever you find podcasts. All right, Kristen, thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Now we have to go to a panel. All right. We'll see you. Bye. Well, thanks so much for tuning in today. I will be back in the studio on Monday, which is over the weekend. But I appreciate your patience in dealing with pre-recorded Skip. And it was great to see a bunch of peers, people that I haven't seen in 3 years, to kind of share stories and the camaraderie that we normally have. So I appreciate you letting me kind of play hooky from doing this show while still doing this show. And I hope you appreciate the folks that we brought on, so you can kind of think about where media shows up and how people are dealing with that media, similar to what I do, but also in a more professional setting. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. If you like what you saw, you can buy some coffee at ko-fi.com. You can go to patreon.com and hit /AVGeeks and kind of do the donation /subscription. Hit the thumbs up, subscribe, notify. Those are all great ways to say thank you. And thank you. I appreciate your eyeballs. So everybody have a great weekend, and we will see you next week live. Everybody take care.